Hey, everybody. I'm here with Dr. August Mebane, Principal Consultant at Solutionists Advisory Group with 15 years of HR leadership experience, including roles as Chief HR Officer and AVP of Human Resources in healthcare, higher education, and the public sector. She helps organizations strengthen HR, change management, employee engagement, and executive coaching, blending strategic insight with practical solutions that drive performance and adaptability. Outside of work, she's a published children's author and enjoys time with her husband and two children. So thank you for coming today, Dr. August. Nice to
Thank
have you.
you. I'm so excited to be here today and to have this conversation.
Well, it's nice to be able to have the conversation after the dishwasher here was interrupting us multiple times and wanted to complete the cycle regardless of what we wanted to do. We were talking a little bit in the preamble about like literally today is the government shutdown. How is that going to, what's your thoughts of how that's going to affect like HR, across the country and federal workers and so on?
Yeah. It's really a shame for federal workers. So because the budget didn't pass, now a lot of those employees will be furloughed. So they will have to wait until the government's back up and running till that budget passes. I think they needed 6 Democrats to pass the vote. Federal employees will get back pay. They typically get back pay, but if you're a contractor, you're not going to get that back pay. Your livelihood is on pause, and if you are considered an essential worker, it really will be that you still have to work and not collect your paycheck until all of this is over. People who are federal employees, they love the benefits, they love being a federal employee until it comes to this point. And then they start to think about, do I need to pivot? And how long will this last? So I do feel like our political climate is very different. It's very blue against red. So I think the last government shutdown lasted 35 days. Don't quote me, but I think it was 35 days. So how long will this one last? And what will people do to keep their bills paid, to keep that line of ability to make money open without just jumping ship? Do you find another job? Do you try to wait it out? Some people are in a financial position where they can wait it out, but then also thinking about it from an HR perspective with culture and with morale. How does this impact the morale of employees who are now going to say, you didn't care enough about me to make a decision? So, my personal opinion, Congress and the president shouldn't get paid if other people aren't getting paid. You have to be accountable for the decisions that you're making. So you can say, well, we're in an impasse, we can't make a decision right now, but it doesn't impact your livelihood. So their pay should be put on pause as well. So just the morale behind that component of the government shutdown is a major piece, which is going to impact engagement, morale, and probably retention because people are probably, I mean, so many people are getting laid off and fired in the government sector until they're even thinking, why am I here? Should I be proactive and go ahead and find something else? And this is just, I think this is going to be the nail in the coffin for them.
Yeah, we do some public sector recruitment. And in the past, the mindset of people taking a government job was stability, pension, benefits, that we call it government jobs, sort of like cash for life in a sense. Like it's harder to get fired usually, and so on. But what we've seen now with all the last few months, with all the cuts that they had and, contractors losing positions and so on, and now the shutdown, people's mindset is changing of like, oh, maybe it's not as safe a bet as it used to be. And so because of that and budget cuts and whatnot, maybe, going to the private sector would be a better option for me, so
Hmm.
that's something we've heard from candidates, just sort of the mindset change of like, oh, it's not as safe as it wasn't a safe bet anymore. So maybe we need to rethink like where we're going, pivoting for, as you said, or
Absolutely.
getting out of it entirely. Especially on the contracting side, like the 1099s that are contracted and they're like we've seen with the budget decisions the last year, some of the major big five consulting firms like the Deloittes, the
Hmm.
Accentures, and so on have made huge layoffs of their U.S. workforce. One of my buddies works for Accenture in Canada, and they're worried about their job too. It's because it's all a domino effect of the government spend. How they're spending their money affects the contractors and the whole industry of contracting. So I think that's when there's a disruption of that, it causes a lot of suffering and problems. But that's what we're dealing with in the economy. It's been a wild ride overall in the economy, I would say.
Yeah, I've had clients, executive coaching clients that are really just they have changed their mind about getting a federal job. Before that was the thing, like you said, and now people are just nervous. They're like the people at the very top are getting fired after a week, after days, after being on the job for so many years. And so gone are the days is that level of stability and security. I think from any job, John, I think we're just in a different time where you can't take anything for granted and nothing can be promised. Funding can get disrupted, budgets, there can be cuts in positions. Organizations are having to just really think about and revamp their brand, revamp what their mission is. Are they able to fund their true mission? So people are having to pivot all over. And so, as an executive coach, that's what I tell people. You have to stay nimble. Don't put yourself in a box and be able to transfer those skill sets that you have. It may look different, but it's still playing to your strengths. The federal government is not it. Even as you said, 1099, I'm a federal government contract organization, and I put a RFP in on a contract, and I got the confirmation. It's like, hey, we're going to have to pull this back down, and we're going to repost it at a later date. We were right at the end of it, and it came as a surprise. It was like, oh, wow, I thought this was a sure thing, but you can't take anything for granted now.
And how has it been like on the healthcare side? Because I mean, we've obviously seen it's been really hard to get talent for healthcare after COVID. The COVID burnout across healthcare for everybody from HR down to the nurses was extreme. A lot of people like wanted to leave the industry completely. They were just so done with it. So what are you seeing on that side in terms of like from a culture standpoint? Like have they been able to fix like the culture issue in healthcare, like burnout and overwork and not enough staff and not enough equipment too and supplies and everything? Like it was pretty bad.
So I think every health system's having still some of those challenges, even if they have fixed a couple of them.
Yeah.
So it ebbs and flows. So in some health systems, they may be fully staffed, but have a huge morale issue. Morale from the standpoint of they feel like they're overworked or uh, they're condensing positions where it's like, yeah, you're a nurse, but you have a ton of paperwork that you have to get done outside of your typical administrative duties. The organizations that I'm most familiar with, I know that they're going through huge transformation of trying to be more efficient, more effective, especially from a cost savings perspective. And that transformation, it's still in progress. I can't tell you if it's working or not. I can tell you that it's definitely making an impact in the morale of the employees, top to bottom. Because you're seeing your colleagues leave. It's like, okay, we're doing change management, we're transforming, we are streamlining, and you're seeing whole departments disappear. And as health systems, they're trying to protect the morale of the employees because the work that people do in healthcare is so important. Attitude and approach to healthcare directly impacts the healing journey of their patients. If they have a bad and nasty attitude in the cancer hospital, that's not what patients want to see. And unfortunately, sometimes that does spill over where people are just frustrated with decisions from leadership, decisions from department heads, and they're tired. People are tired. People have been tired since before COVID, but COVID really just opened people's eyes to see workplace flexibility is something that is important. I believe when we first met and had a conversation, we talked about people backpedaling. So a lot of health systems are trying to find and strike the right chord with what does that balance look like? Because it is healthcare. Nurse can't necessarily work from home 24/7 or every shift. Housekeeping can't work from home. They need to be there to make sure everything is sanitary and done well. But in some of those more operational areas, you were seeing where they're trying to have more flexibility. And we can talk a little bit about what that looks like if you want to go into that return to work piece. I believe health systems are really struggling to figure out what it should look like. And God forbid any of these big things that are in the news, the listeria outbreak, the what is it, measles outbreak, if any of those things really take off the way they could, we're right back at 2020. And what lessons have we learned? And are we in a position where people will be willing to be on the front lines again? Because many people did leave during the pandemic because it was just too much. And honestly, it was because organizations were not prepared to really, one, handle the healthcare piece of it, but from an employee standpoint, how do I support these employees who are on the front line, essentially putting their lives at risk, putting their families' lives at risk? And so when you go through a massive upheaval of restructuring and transformation, they almost feel unappreciated. Like, I'm busting my butt since 2020, and now you're like, what I'm doing is not good enough. And if we think about it, it's almost 6 years later, but it still feels like yesterday.
So how are they? I mean, do you think they actually learned some lessons from the pandemic, or has it been just it was in one ear out the other? I know with the going remote and now it's full back to office, like it seems like some lessons, it's our institutional memory is like only as much as the fiscal quarter or something,
Yeah.
like the fiscal quarter is done, whatever happened before, it doesn't matter, or we didn't learn anything that's going to affect us. Like, how are you dealing with that from like a change management perspective with
Yeah.
like your clients and so on? Like, hey, there's some lessons here maybe.
Yeah, I think people learn the lessons, but it's selective memory. And it's also they're applying it to the situation now. They're like, okay, well, the pandemic's over. Yeah, we have other things happening, but it was in one ear and out the other. It's that selective memory of not remembering that people really took a stand and said, hey, I need the flexibility to continue to make your business work and make my life work. And so, working with organizations, I let them know, don't go backwards. You never know. We're on such a sensitive platform right now in the world where we're just one thing can set us off, right? And we don't know how it will impact the day to day. And you want your business to be sustainable no matter what comes our way. And people have a long memory. So organizations might have a short memory, but people have a long memory. They're like, I don't want to work for such and such healthcare because they're just going to backpedal as soon as things look okay. And what I'm finding in health systems is that the organization themselves are backpedaling, right? So they're like, transformation 2030, that's the big thing, right? Like what are we going to look like in 2030? And some of the initiatives they've put into play, they're already reversing them because they're not working or it's not going the way that they thought. And I'm like, it's only been a year. So are you being thoughtful about how you are planning and strategizing? Or are you just trying to follow what other organizations are doing? Or are you just kind of shooting from the hip? And it feels like a lot of them are shooting from the hip where it's like, we're making it up of what sounds good right now, but what is sustainable and what do your employees need? I always say if you take care of your workforce, your employees, they will take care of that business. They will take care of you and you will directly see it in your bottom line. But if you act hastily just to say transformation 2030, you're going to backpedal on a lot of things and then you don't appear as an expert in what you're doing because you're hiring these big name consulting firms to get you to 2030, but they're just doing what's going to get them the most billable hours. And according to what you're saying, averse, opposed to really assessing the climate of your specific organization. Yes, we can look at benchmarks, but what's going on in your organization where you provide care, where your employees work? It could be totally different from the other healthcare system.
You think it's like vanity metrics they're chasing, or is it like bandwagonism of like what's hot right now in HR and let's do that? Or
I
like,
think it's
oh,
a
we all
combination.
need to work on our ESG scores because that's, otherwise we don't get investment and
Yeah.
funding. Like, what do you
It's a
think it?
combination, John. I've
Yeah.
seen healthcare systems where they're like, "Oh, we need to work on a DEI metric." And then when that group, that department, those leaders say, hey, it should be directly tied into the bonus system. It may be, okay, yes, we'll put it in the bonus system, but it's more like a nice to know metric. It's not going to truly make a dent in anybody's performance bonus. It's not. It's like, hey, like if we can move the needle 0.02, we've done great versus really putting some teeth and some action behind it. We have to get away from equity and inclusion being just a word, the next catchphrase. It really has to be imperatives within the organization where you put teeth behind it, you put some action behind it. But I've seen that a lot in organizations where, yeah, it's listed on the scorecard, it's listed in the strategy, but there's no real action behind it. And not just that, but retention as well. So a lot of organizations are talking about retention because they're losing employees quicker than they can employ them. And whether it's because of, the promise of being hybrid or remote and then backpedaling, or whether it's just culture, whether it's just too much change. A lot of people struggle with change, but it's the only thing that's constant. Things are going to change constantly. And some people just are uncomfortable with it and would rather find an organization that's like, it's not broke, I'm not trying to fix anything right now, but that's going to outrun you at some point. But retention is another one that's always on the scorecard, always a topic in strategies, but what are you really doing behind it besides making broken promises, right? So it's like, we want to make sure our employees are taken care of. We want to make sure they have mobility in their careers. We want to make sure that they have the flexibility they need to know that we care about them. And then things change as soon as the political climate changes or as soon as it's not convenient for the organization. So people are having those conversations too.
Do you think it's that there was like as the pendulum kind of swings, do you think there was just like too much change happening in the last few years, like COVID, everything else that was going on, and that people are just like, I just don't want any, like, we just want stability right now, or like, okay, it's enough. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. I'm overloaded now with things going on. You think that's the mentality, or
Yeah,
is it
people
just
are
like, yeah,
I know my clients and organizations I'm working with, they are definitely looking for stability. So people are tired. People are tired. There's so much change. I keep bringing up the political piece because it's spilling over. It's all interwoven. And people are like, okay, politics is crazy, work is crazy, school is crazy for the kids. Parents are scared to send their children to school because of all the crazy shootings and violence and threats that are happening. And while that has nothing to do with HR, it has everything to do with people. And if it touches people, it touches HR. You have to take care of your people. And there's so many things going on. So you add all of that to, okay, now we're doing system changes. We're doing policy changes. We're changing how we do PTO. We're changing how we do our retirement plans. Everything's coming up as change, change, change. And people can't keep up. They can't just really digest the amount of change that's been happening since 2020 because it's been nonstop. So in 2020, it felt great. It was like, oh, wow, employers are finally seeing that we need flexibility and support in our personal lives and that they need to trust us to get the work done. Now the conversation is my employer doesn't trust me. They think that I won't be productive at home and they need to see my face to think that now I'm going to get more done in the office, which absolutely is not true for everyone because now you have the quote water cooler chats, people stopping by your desk in your office, and you actually get less done in the office if you are a person that is highly sought after to have either a small chat or you're a subject matter expert because people are constantly asking you. And then it's not that that changes, it's just that you can better manage it because they're not right there in your face knocking on your door. If they're sending an instant message, you can wait a few minutes and complete what you're doing before you respond versus, oh, hey, Jack, come on in, right? So it's just been so much change and it's not palatable anymore for people because it's happening in their personal lives, it's happening in their career, it's happening in the political climate. It's just too much for everyone.
yeah. I mean, I think mental health has been an issue now for probably 5+ years. Like, it's just been a lot for people. The change and also the instability and the crazy stuff that's going on, and culturally as well as, like across the board. You're right. Like, it's been a lot for everybody. There's kind of the feeling of a little bit of like anxiety, let's say, about things. And I'm wondering what's going to be able to give us that stability. But you're seeing, even with some of these policies, like certain groups are being affected, right? I think that's the thing of like when we talk about taking care of people, like people that are a little bit neurodiverse, people like working mothers, like they've said, I think the stat was that I saw last week was 3 million working mothers have left the workforce this year because of the return to office push, because they don't have childcare, or they
Yeah,
just can't, they used to have flexibility. I can totally relate to that. I have 3 kids and I'm driving back and forth, picking them up to school, dropping them to school, sports, everything. And thankfully I have my own business, so
yeah,
I have the flex to work when I want. If I need to work at midnight, I can, and not miss the pickup or something. But for others that have to be in an office, like you just tacked on, 90 minutes a day to commute at times and everything else. So it's hard for a lot of people with this whole kind of aspect of it, I guess, right? But
Yeah.
there was a lot of pushback on DEI this year with the Harvard decision. Kind of was the first domino, I think, that really showed obviously there's flaws in every system or flaws in every program. I think there's no perfect program out there, and we got to realize that as well. And maybe, looking at the Harvard decision objectively, I can understand, if you were an Asian student, why you would feel discriminated against with the program. But there's got to be ways around that to fix things a little bit. And I think now there's no middle ground, I think, with policy. It seems like either we're all in on one end, or it's like pendulum, either you're fully left or you're fully right. There's no like, okay, here's a common ground of this is going to work for everybody.
Mhm.
What are you seeing on the HR side about all this? Like, how are HR professionals, like I saw a lot of people liking that, I saw a lot of people hating that.
Yeah.
What's going on with HR?
Always gonna get both sides, like you said, a pendulum. I've had conversation and seen posts on LinkedIn. And people are all over. Some people are like, "Yes, take it out," and then the other group are like, "Why would you take it out? What are we trying to have happen in these organizations versus fighting about the definition of it? What does it? You have to really answer the question, what does it look like in your organization? And it may look different in every organization, and it may be approached differently. People are getting upset that DEI, belonging, justice, whatever you want to call it, while it was in high demand in previous years, it feels like it's being put on the back burner. And then some organizations are like, by golly, we're going to keep moving forward with it. And if we have to call it something different, we will. So that's what I'm seeing, where organizations and people are just they're trying to figure out what to call it if they still believe in it. And then you have organizations where it feels like you're in the Republican versus the Democrat, meeting where you have to pick a side, or you're nervous because you're like, I don't know what to say because political talk is coming up in the boardroom. As far as, are you red or blue, and what do you believe, and what should this look like? And we don't need it. And who needs diversity? Let the person who's best qualified win, which is what DEI really stood for. Let the person that's qualified get it. And if they happen to be Black or brown or a woman or someone who has different abilities, okay, maybe let them have it, right? If they are still the star of the show, maybe not go with what's comfortable for your organization or at your executive level. So people are all over, but I think in the end, we'll see this conversation come back around where people will say it is needed. What does it look like? How do we move forward with it? And you'll see all these positions that are being sunset come back.
Yeah, it's like the pendulum with everything, and I guess that's the issue, is that everything seems to be so extreme and so politicized. We've seen even at some companies where the owners or the CEO would come in and talk politics to staff and expect staff to be politically aligned. So like we're actually seeing a new kind, well, I wouldn't say new kind of discrimination, but let's say a more prevalent discrimination of political affiliation now is actually what card are you holding seems to be a thing now in companies. Instead of everything else, it's really what side are you on, us versus them. And I don't think that's healthy for a country or a business, but I mean that like it definitely hurts your retention if like, because it's obviously the country's kind of 50-50 at this point for parties. If you're not aligned, then a lot of people are going to leave because they don't feel their belonging aspect of like, I can have different views from you, but we can still work together, right? But it seems to be that things are so heightened right now that I've heard from several executives where I couldn't work there anymore. They were showing us reels from the news, and they were expecting us to like nod and agree, and it was, and this is happening in companies, not in like
Yeah.
a community group or something. This is literally at a company where at a board meeting or something, or staff meeting, they're playing reels of political stuff. To me, that's kind of wild. I don't know your thoughts on
Well, then
that.
look at what's happening with the Charlie Kirk situation. People losing their job, losing their jobs for speaking out on how they felt about his views, not so much his death. And because someone at the company or the company wanted to take a stand and show their support for him, people are getting fired for putting stuff on social media or making statements. And while I tell everyone, it's probably best not to list your employer on your personal social media because then they can say, you put that we're your employer and it could look like these are our views. But with the Charlie Kirk situation, people are entitled to feel how they feel about everything. And that's part of the uniqueness of the melting pot of having that diversity of thought, right? But it's getting scary where you can't say, wow, it's unfortunate that his life ended in that capacity and yet still recognize some of the harsh things he said about certain groups. And that's what people were doing. And they're losing their jobs. And so people are getting afraid to speak up. So if you're in a meeting, if you're in the boardroom, if you're anywhere and they're talking politics directly or indirectly, there are a lot of people who are just listening and planning their next move. It would behoove organizations to stay neutral. You are there for your mission, not because you're Republican or Democrat. And if people are working there, they bought into your mission, not necessarily whether you're red or blue. You really have to look at, are we meeting our mission? Everything else is secondary.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to just being like good neighbors to each other. I think that's the biggest thing is of accepting of other people are different from us. They may have different views. If you believe in the Constitution as well, like First Amendment, then that means that you have to accept speech you agree with and speech you may not agree with. That's the compromise or the struggle with when you have that kind of free speech. In other countries, it's not the same way, right? Like in some countries like the UK, people are constantly getting cited and fined for or even jailed for saying certain things that the government would consider not free speech or hate speech because it's against a group or something. And I think that's one of the beauties of the US is like that you have that like say whatever you want. Now, not to say that you won't get judged for what you say. People will not be happy, but you're allowed to say it. You're legally allowed to run your mouth if you want, which is also good because you get ideas come out of that from being able to share, not being scared to share, which in a lot of countries, people are scared to talk up, to speak
Yeah.
against their government. So, I definitely, it's one of the things I admire about the US is that free speech that you have down there. It's a little bit different. In Canada, it's a little bit different. They're not as extreme with enforcement with certain things, but in the UK, it's gotten pretty bad. Like you can hear the news of people, they said the wrong thing or they posted the wrong thing on their socials, and next thing you know, they're 30 days in jail or something. It's pretty wild. So
Well, I fear the US may be going that route because while we say we have freedom of speech, is it really freedom if people are losing their jobs and having negative impacts for what they say? So Charlie Kirk said whatever he wanted to say, whether agreed, disagreed, liked it, or not liked it. He could say what he wanted to say, and he built a huge following. And some people bought into it. Some people came against him. But to me, that's freedom of speech. Say what you want. Is it dangerous at times? Absolutely. But it has to go both ways. If he can say what he wants to say, people should be able to respond without the fear of losing their employment or having those negative consequences that are being enforced. So I'd be curious if anyone sues who's lost their job for their right to freedom of speech to get their job back or a settlement or something to see how that plays out.
I would imagine it depends on if you're in an at will state, like an at will employment state, or if you're in a protected state like California, where you have some, employee protections. There's different rules in every state for how this goes. But yeah, because you could say, the devil's advocate, if you're going to court about this, you would say, well, I said those statements outside of my work capacity. I wasn't wearing a logo like a company shirt when I said it, or saying that I'm representing the company when I said these statements. So it should fall under the protections of the First Amendment. And you can't like if you don't like it, that's cool, but you can just say like we disagree with Jimmy's statement, but that's
Right.
his statement. And he said what he wanted to say. Like so,
Yeah.
I'd be interested to see how that plays out because I can imagine that would be if that becomes normalized, then in a sense you're kind of backpedaling on the First Amendment as well.
Yeah.
And we saw this with Jimmy Kimmel. I just have to bring it up because this is also in the news, where even when Jimmy got his show got canned over statements. Disney pulled back right away. Disney lost 1.7 million subscribers at $10 a pop. That's what, I do the math, 17 million a month or something or whatever. A lot of money they're losing every month, plus viewership and so on. So they lost, there was a financial cost to them to do that. But then for him, we even had, Ted Cruz and others on the right actually defend Jimmy. And they're saying, yeah, this is not good for free speech that you can lose your job. Now he has good defenders, like he has big names defending him. But for like your average, let's say you're an HR person in a small company and you said something and you got canned, who's defending you? Like no one's going to fight to get you your job back. Even if you want your job back, would you want to go back when you know that
Yeah.
they're kind of gunning for you now because they're really unhappy that you're not affiliated politically with them? So that's a scary kind of thing if that's how it is at work, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, employers need to be aware that at will states doesn't mean you can just fire anybody for any reason and go against their rights. That they're still protected with their rights. So that doesn't mean just because you don't agree with their political values or what they believe, it doesn't mean that you can just fire them and then there won't be any repercussions to you. But the flip side of that is, okay, which judge would you get? Which mediator would you get? It all depends on, if the person's actually going to do their job and be a neutral party or if they've picked a side. And so I'm going to watch this closely because I'm really curious to see how a lot of this plays out. But it's getting a little scary out there with the freedom of speech and the consequences of what you say.
Yeah, I think with a lot of this stuff, like return to office, the free speech stuff, like a lot of it, like will play out as it needs to kind of play out. When there's tension, I feel like society will figure out what is the right way. And usually, I'd like to think that the adults in the room are going to say, okay, let's simmer down the rhetoric, let's calm things down a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's find a way forward that makes sense for everybody. That's what we usually see in most cases. It may take 5 years or back and forth fights for a while, but it seems like you guys are pretty good with or let's just go to the status quo and get to a safe place where everyone's kind of no one's happy, but at least we're stable, right?
Hmm.
And I think of a lot of this stuff, it's the way the pendulum is swinging. So when you live long enough, you start to see these cycles of what do you call it? Radical change happening in short bursts,
Hmm.
followed by the pushback from the other side, let's say, and so it maybe this is just normal how societies operate. I'm not sure, but it seems like that's how it usually works out. Like you have a big push for one sort of set of values, and other set pushes back, and we end up nowhere. We end 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, so to speak. So yeah, just moving along too, and we're also sort of thinking about some other things that are important, like on the executive coaching side. When you're working with your clients and so on, like what's sort of like set problems, or what would you say is situations you see frequently being addressed? Like there's got to be pattern to what they're coming to you for support. What do you typically see in terms of like the patterns of executives coming for coaching?
Yeah, so there's a few things. One being just who they are as an executive. I do coach a lot of women who are either new to the executive level or they've been there and it doesn't feel like it's working. They kind of dread going to work. And that's because they're not being their authentic self. So at some point, they got the role, they're excited about it, they have the skill set to do it. But it's more so, how do I show up as an executive? What kind of leader do I want to be? And if I'm being asked to be a leader that doesn't feel comfortable for me, how do I navigate that at the executive level, at that C-suite level? And having those conversations to really talk about, when are you willing to have those difficult conversations? That's happened to me where once I became an HR executive new to that level, I had to have a conversation of, did you hire me to be me or did you hire me to be you? And a lot of people want you to act just like them because that's their level of comfortability. But there's something in you that they needed, that they wanted. And to lose that, then you're not really meeting the needs of the organization or of your team. And so having those conversations, I've also had conversations working with clients about, what does it look like to be a woman of color at the executive level? And a lot of women of color at the executive level are like, I'm the lowest paid. My ideas are always being implemented. I don't always get the credit. And looking at their peers go higher and higher in salary, higher and higher in recognition. And it almost feels like you're invited to the table, but not to speak. So having those conversations with a client, how do you navigate that when your voice is being silenced, but you should be an equal partner? People are fed up with that as well. Just how do you have those conversations? And I always challenge people to be confident enough in your skill set and your abilities to have those conversations. And are they uncomfortable? Absolutely. But at least the people at the table understand. And of course, you have to do it with some professional decorum. You can't just go in there like, you guys aren't listening to me. It's more so, how do you have these navigate these conversations in a professional way that is not emotional, is not what people would say aggressive, but it's a professional conversation of, hey, I wanted to bring to your attention and want to talk about how we can move forward with X, Y, and Z. People are afraid to have those conversations because they barely made it into the C-suite club, right? And they're like, I don't want to rock the boat too much. And it's not really about rocking the boat. It's about how much can you deal with? At some point, you're going to reach your breaking point. But did you even try to bring it to people's attention of what your needs are to be a successful executive in their organization? And so those are some things I'm really seeing with executives and particularly with C-suite women to have those conversations because typically women don't advocate for themselves in negotiating salaries, in communication. We would try to back away because we don't want to be seen as aggressive or difficult or overly complicated, right? Those are the words that women tend to hear when they're doing the same approach as their male counterparts and they're assertive, they're confident, they're bold, they're dynamic. But I see, in even when I'm working in other organizations, I see it where a woman can say one thing and a man can say it in a very different way and then it's accepted from the man. So really working through those dynamics and helping them have what they need to feel comfortable in being assertive and advocating for themselves and ensuring that what they bring to the table can be accepted and not lost in these types of conversations.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I've seen that firsthand when it comes to, like, negotiating salaries where and I don't have the stats in front of me, but the stats are pretty clear that women in general are not negotiating as hard as men in general for salaries, especially at the executive level where there is a bit of leeway with what you can do. It's not like a salary band, like it's negotiable pay a lot of times. Even if they have it posted, they'll, you know, to
Hmm.
get the right person, they'll pay what they need to. And so being able to talk to them a little bit when we are presenting people for offers, being like, listen, you got to tell us what you're looking for. You got to advocate for yourself a little bit in terms of that. Here's the market data. It's good to do your research as well. So you're not just shooting from the hip, but you have an idea of what the market rate is for this position. You can look in your city. We can look and pull the salary guide for you of here's some metrics. And then based on your experience, you can sort of advocate for the right number that makes sense. But, they're leaving a lot of money on the table because they may just take the first offer they get because, it could be confidence, it could be imposter syndrome, which is a regular thing we hear come up a lot, or just, the confidence of I don't want to rock the boat. I just want to get along kind of attitude.
Hmm.
And so it's tough, and I can understand how none of that's cultural thing, but it's more of just how they people's minds work, right? The male mind works a little bit different with certain things, and so it's like taking a conscious effort to kind of you're playing in a game, and you have to like
Yeah.
know the rules of the game, I guess a little bit.
Yeah.
That could be difficult, right?
Yeah, I can tell you from my own experience, and I help people negotiate salaries. And it was a position I was really excited about. It was a chief HR officer position, and I was working with one of the larger executive recruiting firms. Really excited about the role. I would have to relocate my family for this position. I was just really excited about it, John. And we were at the negotiation stage. I was asking questions, did my research. I wasn't asking anything crazy, but it also was during when the housing market was just really crazy. So my husband was willing to support me in my career and the move. He said that I have one request. I don't want to be homeless. I don't want to live in an apartment with two kids. I want us to be able to, find a home and get settled because structure for kids.
Absolutely.
Shared that. I said, I believe in being honest. I used to hide the fact that I had kids. I'm like, oh, I'm going to be judged for it. I don't care. If you don't like it, you're not the employer for me. And I tell people you have to take a stand somewhere if that's important for you. I was negotiating, and then the executive recruiter called and said, hey, I got to be honest, you're about to lose the offer. And I had already talked to the hiring manager, said, hey, we put in an offer for the job. I'm sorry, an offer for a house. We were trying to get a house. And I said, we're really excited. But I hadn't accepted the offer yet because I want to also honor my husband, right? I'm like, let's see what the market's looking like before we really look into renting a house. And so I was surprised at the conversation because I said, wait, I just talked to that person yesterday, right? And said we put in an offer on the house and I'm excited to work with them, etc. And she said, well, he said you were being difficult because you're asking too many questions and they've made the offer. So this is like last and final. And we need your answer. Now, I had interviewed with this organization for 6 months, John, 6 months. It hadn't even been a week. And
Yeah.
I shared that feedback. I said, I've invested 6 months of my time into getting this position. It hasn't even been 3 days, and I'm being forced to make a decision. And because I'm asking questions and advocating for myself, which I would have to uproot my family to do, I'm being
It's a big
difficult.
move. Yeah.
I declined. I said, I'm no longer interested. And she was shocked. And I said, this gives me a glimpse into who I'm working for. Even though I had great interviews with everyone else, I was like, I would report to that person. And if they already see me as difficult for asking questions, they're not going to have an appreciation for me as an HR leader. Was I disappointed? Absolutely. But do I feel like I made the right choice? Absolutely. So it's really important for people to advocate for themselves, do their research. Of course, don't just throw a number out there and see if it sticks, but women have to be comfortable saying their worth. And women are more nurturers. Most women are nurturers. I've seen it firsthand. Men will apply for jobs and they don't care whose feelings they hurt. They're going to tell you like it is what they need and take it or leave it most of the time. And women, I've seen where a lot of women will come in, well, I'm willing to do this. I can be flexible. Like they're really soft with it. And I am that leader that would say, let's do right by this person because they're a phenomenal candidate. They're a candidate of choice for us. Why wouldn't we do right by them just because they're lowballing themselves dramatically because clearly they didn't have the confidence to negotiate or have the research. So it's important, John, but a lot of people are still doing it. And a lot of people are scared to even apply for jobs where they don't meet all of the qualifications. But that goes into the conversation of, people doing the spray and pray method where they're applying to a lot of jobs up or down in their career ladder just to have sustainable employment right now because it's a tough market in the US and you're looking at 6 to 12 months to get your next position.
Well, for sure. Yeah. No, it's taken a long time for people. We say on average now, expect 9 months is kind of the median, let's say, for job search. But I mean, the first red flag I would have said with your experience would have been, interviewing you for 6 months.
Yeah.
Like the fact that they can't make a decision that it took them that long to figure things out. It makes me think that they probably had other candidates in play the whole time and they just were bouncing between everybody, not deciding.
Hmm.
And then the fact that they were pressuring you to close the offer that quickly after such a long negotiation is like, that's another red flag of like, if we had 6 months to decide, why do I only
Right.
get 24 hours to decide? Like at that point, it's like, let's make sure everyone's comfortable. Especially
Hmm.
if you're moving your family, like that's huge, and that's something where it's like, no, take your time to be sure that you can move your family and the whole family's behind you on this because we don't need you leaving in 6 months to go back home because you didn't like the new city or something or whatever, right? Like there's so many
Right.
things that can happen. We've done a lot of relocations with us and
Hmm.
you need to have the spouse's buy-in for reloads 100%. So totally, totally get that. But I think we'll end on that note because we're running late here. But no, there's so much going on, and we could definitely be talking all day. I really appreciate that
Definitely.
conversation.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed our conversation.
It was great.